Say, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch Kick Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm back in Toronto. It's 8:30 p.m. I was away for a while, as you know. We did one on Monday that was just like a private one that we're going to drop simply because our guest couldn't meet us. So we have done one since I've been back. But in any case, we're so excited tonight to be chatting with Sensei Michael Csoke. And we're going to jump right in with a question as we do, and then we'll explain why some of these faces on the call look different to you. You'll know them, but it looks different than our usual lineup. But let's start with you, Sensei Csoke. I've got two questions I want to start with before we get to our intros. And one of them, we do our homework on our guests, and you've got experience in kickbox, in karate, in Muay Thai, in Tae Kwon Do. So, what is your favorite stand-up art for true combat, as far as we might put it, where rubber meets the road, and why? And why is it that you've experimented with all those different styles, which I love, by the way? I'm very excited to break this open with you.
Stand up, definitely the Muay Thai.
Yeah.
Definitely the Muay Thai. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. As you know, I've been doing it for a number of years. Why did I get involved in so many different things?
Well, yeah, and then why the Muay Thai? What made you go that? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That one's better.
Um, I got involved in so many different things. Initially, it was traditional karate because back I started in 1970, and realistically, the only thing that was really around back in those days was karate, or kung fu, or judo. And karate was the one that I had chosen initially. Did a number of years in that. Enjoyed the sparring aspect of it. I love to kick, and that's why I went initially from karate into Taekwondo, because I thought, if I want to improve my kicking, where's the best place to go? I thought, well, that's Taekwondo. That's why I got into the Taekwondo concept.
Yep.
From there, I got into kickboxing when Rick Joslin opened up his club into kickboxing. By the time they were short, only a matter of months, and I'll get back into explaining the reason for that later. Part of it was COVID,
Yeah.
and so I really enjoyed the kickboxing as well. Loved the kickboxing, loved the whole punch kick aspect of it. I guess because it related to the sparring that I always enjoyed. I was never much of a kata
Absolutely.
guy. In all honesty, I was never much of a kata guy. I always liked to fight, to spar. Um, and then later on, again, I may end up having to jump back and forward here. Obviously, I went from the kickboxing, got into the jiu-jitsu because of law enforcement work. It was very practical for law enforcement because you're always putting your hands on somebody, you're always joint locking them, having to lock out a wrist, having to lock out an arm to get control of the individuals. And then Muay Thai hadn't come around yet till around 2000. And then when Muay Thai came in, it's like, ooh, this looks cool too. And so I had to try the Muay Thai. That's pretty much why. I mean, we can delve into it as we go through here. But
Absolutely. We'll break more into the specific journey, but it's rare that we've had somebody who's, touched on almost all the different versions of striking that include kicks and what then made you go the Muay Thai's the one.
uh, I just fell in love with the Muay Thai. I love the kneeing. But again, in my profession, you're close hands on individuals, right? And so sometimes those knees came in quite handy when you try to get control of an individual. So yeah, I just love the art of the seven. Was it seven or the eight limbs? I don't remember what they call it anymore.
Sure.
One or the other, seven or eight limbs. It's got to be eight because that's an even number. Unless you can use your head, then I guess maybe it'd be nine limbs. But
Like that's Lethway's claim to fame, isn't it? They're like,
but,
we
I
do the
just
head.
yep, I just always loved pounding the pads. Always loved hitting the bag, and that's probably why.
Well, that's amazing. So now let's get to the second question that I wanted to ask, which is, we'll get to this in your introduction, but you're a private investigator. And what aspects of martial arts that aren't physical have made them beneficial to your career? Or is it like, no, 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 it's pretty much just the physical?
First off, I have to correct you.
Okay,
As a private investigator, I was a police officer for 30 years. But when I did retire, part of what I did was I did private investigative work,
got it.
right? But it's the police law enforcement aspect where my techniques came in handy.
Yep. So let's open that question up in the same way. So being a detective and then moving in retirement to private investigating, what non-physical aspects came in handy from the martial arts?
I'm going to say the non-physical aspect would be having the confidence of things that I did. Um, there are different types of police officers. Not every cop, I hate to say this, but it's like any profession. You have good people in the profession, you have people that should never be in the profession, and you have mediocre people in the profession. My To me, my challenge is always wanted to be that good cop, and so I always sought out the bad guys. Um, and I think the reason that I had the courage to stand up to a lot of these individuals was my martial arts background.
Hmm. So courage.
Absolutely courage. Yeah. My wife told me not to ramble on. That's why every so often I go dead silent.
Oh, no, no, no. We
Just
just
have
always,
a tendency to ramble on.
you
So
know what? You ramble or don't. It's absolutely your show and it's up to you. So I mean honestly, courage is about as simple as clean an answer. Why don't we do this? Let's do our introductions because I've already got somebody messaging me going, wait, where's Sensei Dauphin tonight? So first off, I just want to say if you're watching on YouTube live or YouTube later, hit subscribe, hit like. If you're listening to the podcast, wherever you are, driving, baking some bread, drive safe, bake well. But if you're here on the Zoom call in real time, there's a chat button at the bottom that we're going to light up. And that's where you can ask questions for Sensei Csoke or for any of us within the ballpark of what we're discussing. And we really welcome you being part of our living history. Now, normally, we have Sensei Dauphin and Hanshi Gary Legacy on the call. They're off teaching. One of the beautiful things, not just about this show, but about, the growing of these various clubs that we highlight, is that people are being asked to travel a lot, especially since COVID. This show started during COVID as a way to keep us together, and now there's a lot of invitations going out. Recently, Sensei Dauphin, you as well, Sensei Sweet, I believe, were in Vienna, and then now they're at West. So that's where they are tonight. So what we've done is first off, it's a no-brainer. Sensei Robert Schlumsky, he's a black belt member of our club, and he has been in the martial arts since he was 5 years old. And the one thing I just want to say is when Sensei Dauphin has family members that he would rather someone else teaches, this is the person he asks to teach his family. And we'll get to Sensei Nicolas Suino in a moment. Sensei Conroy Copeland has been a guest on our show multiple times. We call him the fifth Beatle. It's just that much of a no-brainer how much we consider him part of the band, so to speak. But also, Sensei Copeland, I just wanted to say something on similar lines. I have a student in Toronto who's just started. She's like, I got to go back to Windsor. And I was like, there's only one place. You go, and that's down to Sensei Copeland. So you're going to meet her soon. And
Right.
then similarly, with Sensei Nicolas Suino, who's then going to give our introduction of our guest tonight. When Hanshi Legacy wants to learn sword, or when he sends one of his students, like Randy Dauphin, to go learn sword 30 plus years ago, he goes, go train with him. What I'm trying to get at is these are the people that the teachers ask to help them teach or send people to teach because that's how long and how dedicated these people have been in the arts. Sensei Suino, what do you want to say about our guest tonight?
Well, here's what I want to say. I first met Sensei Csoke, I think it was in Lévis, Quebec, at Rendezvous Lévis. Uh, but my clearest memory of him is actually at a highway rest area somewhere west of Lévis. Uh, Kyoshi Dauphin and I were headed back
or I
to,
was urinating behind the car.
yeah, well, pretty close, right? I'm going to paint a nicer picture of you than that. Um, Kyoshi Dauphin and I were pulling off to get gas, and as we rolled up into the parking lot, not thinking we would know anybody, right? We saw a lone figure, Sensei Csoke, sort of leaning against the back of his SUV, coffee cup in hand, looking like, then came Bronson, if anybody's old enough to remember that show. I mean, he was calm, watching the people in the cars go by, and I looked, I squinted as we're going, and I go, who is that guy? And Randy said, I'm pretty sure that's Mike Csoke. And it was. So we got our coffee and we stopped and chatted with him for a few minutes. It was a nice break from the drive. And then we went our separate ways. But I think that may have been the place where the idea of having you on Punch Kick Choke Chat first came up. I have a terrible memory, so I'm going to take everything I do remember and put it into a good story. Anyway, we chatted for a few minutes. Um, but beyond that, Sensei Csoke is the owner of Full Impact Training and Investigations. This is the official bio, and by the way, Sensei, correct me afterwards if I mash anything up. Owner of Full Impact Training and Investigations with over 53 years of experience in martial arts. His journey began in 1970, and it has spanned multiple martial arts, including karate, jiu-jitsu, taekwondo, and Muay Thai, as we already alluded to. Throughout his martial arts career, he's had the privilege of training under some of the very most respected martial arts that most of us have heard of, including Shintani Sensei, Lee Sukhi, Rick Joslin, as we mentioned a moment ago, Tom Sharkey, Ron Forrester, and Gordie Gong. Sensei Csoke is a retired law enforcement officer with over 30 years of service. He worked as a patrol sergeant, tactical team member, crowd management supervisor, undercover narcotics officer, and forensic investigator and DNA investigation specialist. In addition to his law enforcement background, Sensei is a licensed private investigator and works with police officers, martial artists, security personnel, close protection teams, and members of the military. He's also the author of a delightful book called 30 Years a Cop, What It's Really Like to Put on a Badge and Risk Your Life Every Day, which I ordered the minute I got home from that road trip we just talked about. If you've ever wanted to know what it's really like to put on a badge, to serve and protect, Sensei Csoke is more than happy to tell you. In his 30-year career, he's dealt with everything from smash and grab artists, crack dealers, sophisticated crime organizations, and international fugitives. Most of his work has been done on the rough and tumble streets of Hamilton, Ontario. And the book is, by the way, fascinating. It's an in-depth examination of what it means to be a big city police officer. Not only will it change your perceptions of policing, but it really helps to put a human face on the profession. I'm super stoked to be having this conversation tonight, and hope that introduction was somewhat accurate. Sean, I kick it back to you, sir.
I don't want to, I don't want to give Sensei Ofen anything to worry about, but that's as good an introduction as we've ever had, Sensei Csoke. Thank you for taking up the mantle. Let's come back to you, Sensei Csoke. We always like to start here with our guests, and I know we started touching on this, but what was it like for you growing up? And then what brought you into your first martial arts dojo, club, or environment?
Growing up, I was a fairly competitive kid, athletic-wise. Did track, loved gymnastics, devoted myself to gymnastics. And I happened to run into a fella who, from high school, who at the time was a green belt in karate. It's like, oh, karate, that sounds kind of interesting. And back in those days, 1970, it was very somewhat mystic because you didn't have a lot of it around. And I always had a fascination for individual things. Like, there's never much of a team player. I guess part of it was that if our team was losing, you could be a really good player, but if your team is losing, it would be frustrating. So when I ran track, if I came first, it was my abilities. If I came last, it was the lack of my abilities. Same with gymnastics. Well, I found the same as with the martial arts as well. I found it to be an individual thing. And if I can achieve certain things, it would be myself achieving that as an individual. I guess the other thing about it was I enjoyed the hardness of it. Back in those days, I mean, it was hard. And I've listened to other podcasts of individuals that, have been from the 60s and the 70s, and we're all the same. And when we say it was hard, you didn't have kids walking into the clubs. Like, nobody under the age of 16. I don't ever remember any kids coming to these clubs. And of course, we didn't wear any kind of padding when we would spar. And I'd go home with black and blue. I'd be sitting in high school at my desk, and guys would be looking at my arms going, what the hell? What happened? Karate. It was like a badge of courage, right?
So
it absolutely fascinated me. And especially, I found it such a challenge. It was a hard physical challenge. And I remember saying, in my white belt, oh, geez, I'm going to get my yellow belt. I'm done. I'm quitting. You get to the yellow belt, right? And then you're working out. And, oh, God, maybe I'll get to my orange belt. I remember by the time I got to my green belt, it was like, well, I'm already in the dark colors. I guess I'm committed now. And here I'm here to stay. But it was very different. It was very different.
So before we go around the horn, at least for a couple of us, I want to ask you, what was that first club? And what can you remember about the environment or some names we might not have heard? And at what moment did you know you were sticking around? Like, what was the I'm never leaving?
I have to say, it wasn't until I got my green belt when I decided I'm totally committed.
Hmm.
Because I really wavered. My, as I said, and I know other instructors have said, like the instructors back in those days, they were hard and they were tough guys. They were tough guys, right? So, and they were tough on us. Um, but that was part of the challenge that I really enjoyed. I loved the challenge. I would be doing my push-ups and I'd look at a belt rank beside me, and if he's doing more push-ups, I'd be like, I got to do more push-ups than him. Next guy on the other side of me, he's doing more sit. I got to do more sit-ups than him, and I made it a personal competition within myself. And that aspect I really enjoyed.
And then in terms of any names, anybody specific, or you're like, because sometimes we don't hear a name from the old school era, and then they echo out at episode 200, and we're really happy to help with that living history.
Part of the problem with being in it for so long was that I forget a lot of people's names. The only names, obviously, I remember my very first instructor. His name was Alan Howell. And Masaru Shintani, he was part of Masaru Shintani's organization. So I obviously dealt with Masaru Shintani for many, many years after that. Anybody else in the club, I'll be honest with you, other than having a run in with a fella who was probably one of the roughest and toughest guys we had in the club. And he's what I referred to as a guy that was brought up in the North End. I mean, every city has its tough areas. In Hamilton, it was the North End. This guy was a North End boy. He was tough. And I ended up running into him years later as a police officer. So that's a whole different story, and having to arrest him, whole different story. But yeah, the only one I truly remember, in all honesty, is just my original instructor, Alan Howell.
Right on. Sensei Copeland, I want to jump to you with something he said. First off, you were having a nice laugh at the idea of black and blue, no pads. We've talked about it on the show a fair bit, but maybe not with you. What's the value of that no pad sparring? But secondly, one thing I want to ask you is he mentioned the individualism. Was that your experience back in the day? Because I know we talk so much about how the people are the martial art and how there's no cliques in karate today. But back then, did you have that feeling of rugged individualism as well as what's your thoughts on that black and blue no pad era?
Well, well, we can most of us from the old days can attest to the fact that there was no padding, and the black and blue was a badge of honor. I remember, leaving class, I couldn't get my feet back inside my shoes because the toes had swollen from sparring class, and every class we were sparring. So it's what brought you to where we are now because we can appreciate a good hard class from back then. That built the foundation for sure. And yeah, it's always about that individual competition. We had we had one particular fellow that I remember. Whenever it was time to get a partner, he was the toughest guy in the class, and that's who I wanted to be my partner. Every class. He got so bad that he says, "Can you find someone else?" But that's how it was back then, for sure, absolutely. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Sensei. Robert, um, you've been in this martial art way longer than your youth suggests. I'm not trying to make a joke. You don't look as old as the amount of time you spent in this martial art. Talk to us about that badge of honor and talk to us about, yeah, your sense of individualism. Because, starting at age 5, I imagine there might have been more of a sense of the club being what you're part of. Maybe not. Where does that all
Mhm.
fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, just on the badge of honor part, I was laughing when Sensei Csoke was talking the coming home black and blue, black eye, something like that, fat lip, and nowadays jumping on a Zoom meeting or something like that, and just sitting there with that. And to me, it's normal. I don't know, I don't even really think about it. But sometimes I'll come home, my wife says, "Holy shit, like what happened to you?" And it's like, "Oh, this is I thought you'd be used to this by now." And "Oh, don't you want to like cover it up or something before?" No, I'm good. Whatever people ask about, I'll tell them about karate or jiu-jitsu or something. That seems like a benefit. So it's just one of those things that seems normalized and you don't really think about it. You kind of just walk around with it. And I don't know. I kind of love it. Other people maybe not as much, but that's why we're in this crowd. It's funny too because I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a few years ago, and people will accidentally knee you or something like that. And it's like, "Oh, are you okay?" Like, don't worry, I've been hit harder than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just that's a fun thing to bring to a different art. Yeah, the individualism. I think it kind of depended on the class and the season. There was there's certain people that you start with and that you spend a lot of time with that you feel that sense of, I don't know, not like belonging, I guess. So you kind of belong to that particular group. But then there was that sense of, yeah, you look to the person next to you. If they're doing more push-ups, you try to keep up. If they do their kata better, you want to, you want to do yours better next time. Or if you fight with them and they get the better of you, you come back next class and think, I'm going to try this. I'm going to get them with this. And I don't know. I think we had a pretty good balance, at least around the time I was coming up. Obviously, it was a bit different when I was young, but as a younger person, but you still had kind of that sense of both everyone helping each other, but also trying to be a better individual and always trying to get the better of someone if they, were better than you on that particular day.
Thanks, Robert. I love that. That term I talk about is trudging partner. And the thing about an individual sport is if your trudging partner doesn't show up, you still do, or art, not necessarily a sport. I just want to say a quick thing before we go to Sensei Suino. Like I did start with no padding, just mouthpieces. In my experience, there's no less black eyes, but there are less split eyebrows and less broken toes. Like the black eyes are kind of the same. That impact's still happening. It's just there's less splits, which I don't think is a bad thing, especially given my career, assuming you're in a fighting club. Sensei Suino, where do you want to go with this individual idea? Of course, we've talked a lot with you about the idea of old school padding versus new school, so you can touch on that or not. But I want to ask you about the individualist versus the team man or the club man.
Well, I love that Sensei Csoke mentioned gymnastics. I was a high school gymnast, and it's funny, it combined those two things really, really well because everything was individual. You get on the still rings yourself, right? You get on the floor X yourself, you get on the high bar yourself, but you're part of a team. And I guess I really relished that because I tried ball sports and I just didn't like having to depend on other people for success. Um, but in gymnastics, you go out there and you grind yourself and you get your score. And if everybody on the team does well, then the team does well and you can celebrate. So interestingly, I guess I don't mind being part of a team, and it reminds me very much of the atmosphere in dojos. I love being part of a dojo. My dojo family, right, is truly a family. But each of us is there grinding away at our own thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's kind of how I see it.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Soka, let's come back to your journey. So talk to us about, you started in 1970, you're getting that green belt, you're thinking you might stick around. Talk to us about the next couple of years leading up to your black belt, any art shifts you might have experienced during that time or after, and talk us through a bit of that time for you and what you're experiencing and getting excited by.
Yeah, initially I maintained myself in the Wado Kai Karate through Masaru Shintani again until I received my black belt. Um, Now, this is part of the problem with trying to reach back so far in my memory. I cannot remember, and I think that my original instructor had moved to Brantford, or Brampton, if I can remember. So I think that's why I went into Taekwondo after, besides always having an interest, because Taekwondo had now come in around mid-1970s, I think, something like that. And we didn't have any Taekwondo clubs before. And all of a sudden, here's a Taekwondo club just down the street from where my club used to be. And like I said, I love to kick. Well, best place to go. So I joined the Lee Sukhi's Taekwondo club. I stayed there, and then I received my black belt in Taekwondo. And then I ended up moving to college. Moving up, no. Yeah, this is where I'm going to screw myself up with my dates and my times. I can't remember whether I went to Joslin's before I went to college or after. But I also had an interest in when Rick opened up the club in kickboxing. And I can't remember why I left, whether it was because I ended up moving out to Brampton. I really don't remember back that way. But anyways, that's why I wasn't that long in Joslin's club. I think I was only in there for a couple of months. Enough to truly open my eyes, I have to admit, because here I was, I got 2 black belts. And I decide I'm going to give kickboxing a try. And never put on a pair of gloves before, like boxing gloves. I put on a pair of 16-ounce boxing gloves and my shoulders were burning, just trying to hold my hands up. Never punched a bag before, because in karate and Taekwondo, we constantly kick the air with our hands and our feet back in those days. Punching a bag and I'm springing the hell out of my wrists. And then I get put up in the ring against this kickboxer. And we're moving around a little bit. I throw a roundhouse kick. I catch him in the stomach. He looks at me, goes, "Nice kick." And that's all I remember. I remember Remember getting up off the floor? I got blood all coming down my nose, thinking, what the hell hit me, right? Well, he's the one that hit me, right? And I have to admit, it completely opened my eyes. Completely opened my eyes to the point where after my experience at Joslin's, I completely changed my whole concept of the martial arts. The whole idea, and I don't mean to offend traditional martial artists, but to me, it was all about self-defense and survival, right? Whenever I was in training, whether even from a white belt, it was all about survival. I would punch and kick as hard as I could, always thinking that that bad guy was in front of me. And I carried that right through my entire career. And I think it really changes you when you do that. I really think it gives you that survival mentality in that. So after I left Joslin's, and I think that's when I went to college, then I opened up my own club at Sheridan College in Brampton, where I taught a combination of everything: karate, kickboxing, taekwondo. I basically just put it all together.
So let me back up a little, and we'll probably break this one open, but you said not to offend any traditional martial artists, but then you went on to describe, self-defense, facing an opponent with every kick or punch. That sounds very traditional. So where did you mean to suggest it might be something that would offend a traditionalist?
I guess at Joslin's, I learned to put my hands up.
Right.
I learned to put my hands up. Where, let's face it, in a lot of karate tournaments, a lot of guys don't put their hands up, right? Their hands are all sitting down here, throwing their kicks and throwing their hands. I could be wrong. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been to tournaments. Back in those days, like, people rarely ever put their hands up. Where, like I said, once I learned about kickboxing, it's like, do not drop your hands. You're going to pay a price.
I just watched a video today where someone got knocked out with a tornado kick. And my comment on the video was no hands were raised that day, because even the aggressor had their hands down here, and the guy, and it was Taekwondo and they were just trying to score. But I'm like, Jesus, I mean, they're throwing full contact kicks to the head, and not one person ever raised their hand above waist level. So I don't think you're wrong that that's still a part of the thing. Sensei Copeland, how important is the bag? How important is getting those 16-ounce gloves on? And how important is hitting in exchanges, not just respectful points?
Well, martial arts is a military art, so it's a fighting art. And it has changed from style to style, dojo to dojo, instructor to instructor. But, resistance training is part of what builds your body to make you stronger. And if you're punching, which is one of the, important component of karate, you have to hit something. I mean, we practice punching at the air just to develop, alignment, but you have to hit something. If you don't hit things, you have no idea what the feedback's going to be like. Like Sensei Csoke says, you sprain your wrist and then you can't punch for a week and a half. You have to build up the strength in the body. You need to get feedback, and you got to test your skills. So if you're not having that combative experience, then it's not really the traditional martial arts. It's more of a sport type concept. And if you're in a fighting club, you better keep your hands up, because someone's going to get hit.
Well, I love that. I'll go to you next, Robert. But I remember I still have this heavy bag. I bought it 32 years ago when I started karate. It's 40-pounder, but it's tightly packed. And I had it hung at my summer camp. I was like a yellow belt. Every single guy who was 18 walked into that, hit it, and went, not one guy didn't sprain his wrist. Not one guy knew how to hit that bag without buckling the wrist. Not one. And as a yellow belt, I already knew how not to, but that was literally probably my one win is I know two kata, I've fought, I've gotten a black eye, I've given one, and I don't buckle my wrist. That's not bad. That's not bad. Robert, where do you go with any of these ideas?
Yeah, it's all different once you start.
Clubs, whatever.
Yeah, it's all different once you start hitting things, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about in our dojo a lot how, if you hit someone as hard as you can, you're probably going to break your hand. Hopefully, you do more damage than you do yourself. But, if you hit something hard, you can fracture your hand can break, especially if you punch wrong. That's just the reality of it. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're hitting stuff, and no better way than to start hitting a bag and get a sense for that. I was laughing about the keeping your hands up. I just last Friday I was helping to run the fight class in our club, and a bunch of Q belts that keep dropping their hands exactly like you're talking about. I just told them none of you are fast enough to keep your hands up, or sorry, none of you are fast enough to drop your hands and stand in front of someone else. None of you are, and I just gave the demo of okay, try to block this, and you can't do it if your hands are down here. Yeah, it's such a fundamental thing, and just the natural human reaction after a little bit of fighting, 30 seconds into this, it all starts to sink down. And it's just a really important reminder. It's such a basic thing, but anyone listening to this, it's worth being reminded of that.
Well, thanks, Robert. And before we go to Sensei Suino, one thing I really want to add is that I do think, and this goes to, maybe your fear of offending traditionalists, and I'll be willing to. I do think in traditional martial arts there could be too much respect given to something that wouldn't knock someone out, right? And so what happens is exchanges get shortened to an unreasonable degree, where you shift in, bit of a back fist, bit of a body touch, and then everyone backs out. Whereas one thing I know that boxers and kickboxers do is they play exchanges way longer. When I go with my boxing buddy Adam, who's a Golden Gloves guy, he comes in, and if I touch him twice, he doesn't give a shit. He just keeps coming in, working my body, working my head. And I think a lot of traditional martial artists, whether they need to or not, I think they need to put themselves in a situation where the other person isn't stopping and has skill. It's not just, oh, street guy would get knocked out. It's fight with a boxer who doesn't care if you touch him 4 times. He'll touch you 5. And where do you go with this, Sensei Suino? Thick gloves, hitting things hard. We know you love
Well,
pressure testing. Where do you go?
enlightenment.
Ah!
Uh, after
Wild
15
fox
years,
slobber.
yeah, after 15 years of judo and karate, my buddy John Spears, who we've had on the show, came back from the army. He had been in the army for 8 years and been in special forces, and the whole time or most of the time, he'd been on the army kickboxing team, and had been doing competitive kickboxing and training with guys that are, that just, that kicked and punched really hard all the time. And I had been doing, some pretty hard judo, and what I thought was some pretty hard karate. And two things happened. One is he asked me to hold the airbag for him. And the first time John Spears kicked that airbag, I got the wind knocked out of me, even with a giant airbag, right? I had never experienced a round kick that hard. I'd never experienced it. So I quickly became a student of his in that regard. And then we started working on sparring together. And I found the same thing. Man, I put on gloves and we would do informal kickboxing. And oh my God, a 30-second round was an eternity the first time I put gloves on and had to protect my head, right? Not to mention the guy is, I'm 5'7" with shoes on, and he's about 6'2", so he had a bit of a reach advantage. Anyway, the point being, right, there's levels to this game, and when you train with somebody who's used to training really, really hard with high impact, it wakes you up in a big hurry.
Back to you, Sensei Soke. Talk to us about starting that club and talk to us about how that first little while went. Did you stay with your same instructor? Were you wandering Ronin before you found your next one? And how did you find teaching all these accumulated arts you had, and what did it do for your art?
Wandering around, and yeah, that suits me. My first club initially, I think I think 21 or 22, and it was at a recreation center. What I did find was that's where we started to have the kids come into the club. And to be honest with you, I had more patience with the adults than I really did with the kids. I had that, I don't know, I had that rough and tough mentality that I think I was a little hard on the kids when I think back, to the point where actually I tried to drive them so much that the kids would quit and they just wanted adults. My second club was at Sheridan College, a little different. Most of the people were my age. Ran that for a year because I was only in the college there for a year. Had a great time, a lot of fun teaching there. The next club that I actually run was actually the actual police clubs, but we've jumped quite a bit now into my history. Teaching police officers was, I absolutely loved it. They had a certain mentality, right? They had a survival mentality. And so we could be pretty rough with them and they'd be pretty rough right back. So that aspect I really enjoyed.
And so from those two clubs at Sheridan, did you keep teaching, or was there a pause there where you didn't keep teaching?
Again, I've got to think back here in my history here. I remember there was a pause in my life because once I had left, I was working in steel mills and working shift work and stuff like that. So I think there was about a year or two where there was basically a pause in my martial arts career. Yeah, it's tough to think back that far. It wasn't until I got into policing where I really delved myself into the martial arts. So if you want me to take it from there, then I can really get into the whole aspect of use of force in the martial arts.
I absolutely do. But before we do that, we're just going to go to Sensei Copeland and Sensei Shlumsky because they haven't been on the show as much. Sensei Copeland, teaching kids, teaching adults, which do you prefer? What's the benefit to an instructor of both?
Well, back in the old days, like Sensei Csoke said, there was no kids, so the atmosphere was totally different. But things have changed quite a bit, and teaching adults is rewarding, but teaching kids, to me, I find it more rewarding, and it tests me as an individual instructor, my patience, because I've learned to become more patient and then even more creative. But there's two different, atmosphere, or two different areas, adult, and they learn different, they comprehend different. But to see a kid goes from being 5 years old and at 35 they're still in the martial arts, and that to me is success.
Robert, teaching kids, teaching adults, pros and cons. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a soft spot for teaching the kids because if my instructor never taught the kids, I wouldn't be here right now. So, I will say one of the most rewarding things for me as an instructor is seeing some of the kids that go from age 7 to age 15 to age 20. I can think of a few people in the club right now that have been there from about age 7 to 13 or so. And just seeing how they evolve, not only physically, but in their confidence, just their demeanor. They walk in the dojo. They used to come in a little bit nervous and looking around, and you could feel the nervous energy. And now they walk in confident. They're ready to fight. They want to scrap. Like it's great to see that transformation. That is really rewarding. I will say for me, one of the more challenging things in teaching adults, I mean, you get some people that just, you can't stop them from becoming a black belt, but some people, for the adults, I've, especially as a kid who kind of, I knew how to do a side kick really well when I was 10 years old and never really remembered the struggle of learning that kind of stuff. I definitely took a little while to teach, to learn how to teach some of the adults that, were a bit older, that weren't quite as, didn't have the facility. And so trying to learn how to break down techniques for people who didn't pick them up right away, and just try to find different ways to teach things and think about things a different way and explain some of the struggle to people. For me, that part was actually a little bit challenging, and just, different types of people that walk in the door that you're supposed to teach. So yeah, pros and cons on each for sure.
Thanks, Robert. So now, Sensei Csoke, let's jump back. You decide you want to get into law enforcement. Talk to us about that, and talk about how that then made you go, yeah, I'm in martial arts for real.
So prior to law enforcement, I became a correctional officer at our city jail. While I was there, I was introduced to what's called the PR-24 baton. It was a brand new weapon. This is around 1978, 79, I think. And because I was fairly skilled in the martial arts already, I picked it up like that. Matter of fact, I was embarrassing the instructor. No offense against him, but he was kind of an overweight guy. I really wasn't much of an athletic guy, and he's teaching us, and I'm spinning this thing around. It's like looking at me like, how the hell can you do that? Well, it's just the martial arts, right? So what happened was, when I got hired, I initially got hired first I tried to apply to the Hamilton Police Department. And I got to the interview aspect, and I did the interview, and I got turned down. And I got turned down because I was too mild-mannered, passive, and too soft-spoken to be a police officer. And to boot, I graduated from art. And one of the senior police members that sat on my board made a comment to the other board member. I found this out years later. He said, "We're going to hire an artist. Next thing you know, we're going to be hiring musicians." I was just back in the day. I got turned down by Hamilton. So I applied to Toronto when I get on the Toronto Police Department. When I get on Toronto was just introducing the PR-24 baton. Do you understand what the PR-24 baton is? Or
No, break it down for us.
it's like a tonfa.
Okay.
Side handle baton, right? 24-inch baton with a handle on it. And it had two names. One was a PR-24, which stood for Public Relations, 24 inches long.
Hot.
It was also called a monadnock. And the reason it was called monadnock was it was invented by a police officer in the New Hampshire area, and there's a Mount Monadnock. And I don't know how he equated the mountain to the baton, but that's how the two names came out. Anyways, when I was up at the college, Tom Sharkey was running the program, and he introduced us to the PR-24. Well, I already knew how to use it. So, of course, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just swinging away like a madman with it. And he comes up and he goes, you're pretty good at that. And I said to him, well, sir, I said, I was trained on it. I was on a member of a response team in our jail. And I said, in the future, because I knew they were going to introduce it, and this is pretty ballsy of me, I think, as a recruit, but I said to him, in the future, if you're looking for help teaching, I'd be more than happy to do that. Well, of course, I do my time at the Toronto Police Academy. I go back to the Ontario Police College, and there I meet Jan Crayfeld, who was a Toronto police officer and a jiu-jitsu man. Jan was the very first person that introduced me to jiu-jitsu. Over time, we actually became friends and tried to run a club together. And again, that's a little bit off. I don't want to drift off too much. But anyways, when I had a year, I was on the street working for a year, and I get called into my superintendent's office. And when you get called into the boss's office, you always assume that you're in trouble. Huh. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, what did I do wrong? I had my hat on. I made sure I always wore my hat and made sure I was always, presented in uniform. So I go in the office, I sit down, and he says to me, you're being transferred to police college, because you're going to be going there under Sergeant Sharkey in the defensive tactics section. I was absolutely dumbfounded. So in a few months, I find myself back up at the police academy teaching. And I have to admit, I was very intimidated. I only had a year on the street. Mm-hmm. Here I am teaching officers everything from 1 year on to 30 years on the job. So very intimidated, but so they had chosen about 6 of us from various areas of Toronto. And most of us all had martial arts background. Some didn't, but most of us all had martial arts background. And we started to teach the PR-24 baton to the officers. And then from that, then we started, Sergeant Sharkey would start to teach us different aspects of boxing, different aspects of street tactics, and so on and so forth. Actually, with his boxing, he was a very good boxer. He also has a background in jiu-jitsu, but he was a very good boxer. And if I can recall correctly, he was a good boxer in the military, because he was a special force. I don't think he was a Green Beret. He was, I forget exactly what he was, but he had been in Vietnam. So he was one tough nut. And if you've never met Tom Sharkey, he's one tough character. And so he used to box with us all the time. And I used to come home and I would have broken blood vessels all over my cheeks, all over my nose. My wife would go like, aren't you teaching at the academy? Why are you such a mess? And I go, I call it a lesson in leathercraft from Sharkey. But he was good enough. I mean, he was always good enough to let up and not really knock the hell out of you. But so once I kind of developed those skills, I applied to come back to Hamilton. And the reason I applied to come back to Hamilton, as much as I truly enjoyed working in Toronto, was the cost of living, and the drive back and forth was killing me. I could buy a home for a third of the cost that they were charging in Toronto. And I had a bit of a vendetta with Hamilton. They told me I wouldn't make a good police officer, and they pissed me off. So there's a bit of an underlying factor there. So when I came to Hamilton, they knew now that I had this background in what they called defensive tactics. It wasn't called use of force back in those days, in defensive tactics. So then they would use me periodically to teach the baton, to teach this, to teach street tactics, and so on and so forth. And then downtown, while I was walking the beat downtown, it was a jiu-jitsu club. And I happened to be walking by and I see the sign. I go, oh, it's a jiu-jitsu club here. Curious. I walk upstairs and I start watching. The instructor at the time, his name was Alex Kilfin. And I'm watching this jiu-jitsu and I'm going, it was far more involved than it was at the police academy. right? So I'm watching the joint locking, the arm bars, the hammer locks, the throws, and I go, you know what? I mean, this is made for law enforcement. This stuff is made for policing. I mean, this is what I need. And on top of that, they were also kicking and punching. So I was getting a combination of both, right? I already knew how to kick and punch. Now I have the opportunity to learn about joint locking, throws, and so on and so forth. So to me, it would make a well-rounded individual. So then I joined that club there, and under Ronald Forrester. It was at that time it was the Canadian Jiu-Jitsu Association under Ronald Forrester, and so I spent a number of years there. And from Forrester, I ended up going to, and again, I can't remember why I ended up so Forrester, but Kilfin decided he was going to retire. Well, then I needed somewhere else to go. So there was Bob Krantz out in Milton. So I went out to Bob Krantz and I trained with Bob Krantz. I think up until I got my brown belt. And then I ended up opening my own police club to police officers.
And that work you were doing at Milton, was that in jiu-jitsu or was that in a striking style?
That was jiu-jitsu.
Got it.
Yeah. So I was constantly being pressured by officers, right? Oh, you teach this, you teach that. Why don't you open a club here? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do this? So that's what really spurred me on to open a club. Because I thought there's enough guys here that are asking, and nobody needs this stuff more than police officers do, right? So I started a club for police officers.
Mm-hmm.
I ran that for a number of years. Shift work would interfere so often. I might shut it down for a year. I might start it up again. It would all depend where I'd be working at the time. Use of force. So of course, use of force is created now, and they're looking for use of force instructors. Well, I was kind of one of the obvious choices. So I got sent down to the Ontario Police College again, and where I certified as use of force instructor. Then when I came back, again, I had the club on the go, and then I started teaching different seminars. I would just basically go around, and I guess one of the advantages of not being connected to an organization was I somewhat had anonymity to different organizations, and they didn't perceive me as a bit of a threat. So for example, if I had, let's say, a karate background or a jiu-jitsu background or a Muay Thai background, I couldn't walk into a karate club or another club and say, would you guys be interested in learning a bit of Muay Thai? Would you guys be interested in learning a bit of this or that? I'd come in and say, would you guys be interested in learning what the police learn, police use of force? It's like, oh yeah, we'd love that. Absolutely, yeah, bring it on. So I would go from Taekwondo clubs to karate clubs to all different clubs where they would allow me to come in and teach, just to give them an idea of what police officers do. So I enjoyed that whole aspect of doing those little mini seminars for people.
So let me jump in with two questions here. First off, if it weren't for lawsuits, would jiu-jitsu be the use of force, or would cops like to strike? And I don't mean like, I'm not asking about aggressive men. I'm asking about effectiveness, because it seems to me use of force in terms of joint locks is a very legally sound way to deal with someone, whereas driving them in the side of the head isn't.
Well, it comes down to this. So there are different levels of force that are used and applied. And it's the individual, it's what the individual displays that causes the officer to go to different force levels. So the least level of force is officer presence. And you might think to yourself, how is that a level of force? So I'll give you an example of, let's say that there's 4 or 5 rowdy guys in a bar, and the bar owner wants them out. He calls the police. So we show up. When we show up, maybe one guy looks at us and goes, I'm out of here. And off he goes. Well, that was a level of force that just resolved one issue with one individual, right? It was our presence that made that individual not want to get into a confrontation. Our next level of force is what we refer to as tactical communications, learning how to speak to individuals. So you still have the other 4 guys there. And you go, look, guys, the owner's not happy. You guys getting a little out of hand. You know, you've been spilling beer on people, like, so on and so forth. You had a little too much to drink. Technically, you could probably arrest you for being drunk. Why don't you just adios out of here, and up you go. One guy might go, yeah, I'm going to take that route. And he leaves. Well, there's that second level of force that's been successful. You have a few other people there that haven't decided to leave yet. So you might say, your presence hasn't worked, your communication skills haven't worked. You will still try to communicate with them, but I might tap somebody on the shoulder and go, buddy, you got to leave, right? He might knock my hand away. So what he's doing is he's upping his level of force, his level of resistance that is causing me to have to up my level of force to get control of that individual. So I may grab him and put him in an alarm lock, right? Well, what we refer to as the soft hand techniques. There are soft hand techniques, there are hard hand techniques, right? And when an individual chooses to become resistant or combative, you have the option to use soft hand technique, hard hand technique, or you can go to intermediate weapons, which are pepper spray, your baton, or a taser. Those are all the options that are open to you at that time. So let's say I put this guy in a hammerlock, get a pair of handcuffs on him, but there's another guy now stands up, he decides he wants to fight it out, and he puts himself into a fighting stance to fight with us. There was a time in my early police career where we almost felt that we had to be punched in the face before we could punch them back. That's what we believed. So, but when the whole concept of use of force was introduced, we were taught about the concepts of recognizing what we call threat cues, right? So this guy, let's say he puts himself in a fighting stance. Well, what's he telling you? He's telling you he's ready for battle.
One thing.
Right? So we teach to look for threat cues. And various threat cues are obviously, number one is a stance. If someone puts themselves in a fighting stance, that's a threat cue. If someone clenches their fists while you're talking to them, that's a threat cue. If someone says to me, it's going to take you and the entire freaking shift to get me out of here, that's a threat cue, right? If someone removes something, someone takes a hat off, someone takes a shirt off, what are they telling you? They're looking for a confrontation. So that would give the officer the right to use the level of force. And no longer do you have to be hit. If you can recognize those threat cues and articulate why suddenly you tuck your pepper spray out and sprayed somebody in the eyes, but they didn't punch at you, if you can articulate that he showed those threat cues, you have the right to use that level of force. And this is a lot of times that happens out on the street. You could be driving by your car, and shooting, all of a sudden you see your officer whip out his baton and wail at a guy in the fine. It's like, what the hell did he do that for? The guy didn't do a thing. But the officer may have recognized those threat cues that the average person does not pick up. And he acted on it lawfully.
Yeah. Sensei, this ties into a question I had about different martial arts that you've trained, striking arts and jiu-jitsu and more of the controlling techniques. How does multiple opponents factor in? I kind of have this perception that if you have multiple opponents, let's say one or two officers and 5 or 6 people that are being aggressive, then you need to rely perhaps more on striking arts. Whereas if you have, let's say, more on your number, then that's when you can rely on jiu-jitsu and controlling and a little bit less, hard hitting with some of those techniques. Is that accurate, or what's your thinking on multiple opponents?
Yeah, that is accurate, because in any group, you're going to have a few brave people, and you're going to have a few people that are kind of got dragged along, and they feel brave because they're in a group. So have I taken out a baton and waylaid a guy across the thigh and everybody else has backed off? Absolutely. So it's had two effects. It's rendered the individual that wants to fight me, he's hurt, he doesn't want to fight anymore, but everybody else sees and backs off and doesn't want to fight with you anymore. But I will agree in that sense that the environment's is a huge factor that's involved in that, right? If I have very competent officers around me, I might grab a guy and throw him in a hammerlock and push him up against the wall to put a pair of handcuffs on him, knowing full well that I've got other officers around here that can take care of that situation. Would I do it if it was just me and 4 guys? Probably not. You're probably right. I would probably refer to my punch, my kick concept. Drop a guy if I have to. And usually, like I said, if it doesn't, then I drop the next guy and I deal with the next individual.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And then my other question that I wanted to ask you, and we've had some other people on, but not from your region, who have said that, in fact, police officers are not actually required to do much training. Do you think that officers are undertrained for the amount of engagement they have to have that could be physical at that level?
The sad part is that the profession gets the black eye when they see, obviously, officers react inappropriately. And it's always because of the lack of training. The first thing that see is it's always training that always gets cut, always gets cut. The budgeting always gets cut, and it's always training. So it's very, very frustrating. So here's an example. When I taught at the Ontario Police College, we'd have our recruit classes would come in, and I don't know if it's changed now, but I mean, I was teaching it back in the 90s. We'd have a class of one class would come and we teach them handcuffing. The next day, we're teaching them to punch a kick. The next day, we're teaching them how to remove somebody out of a car. And so, yeah, but what about the handcuffing? Let's get back to the handcuffing. Let's get back to the punch kick. And that wasn't happening. And I found that very, very frustrating. I felt very bad for the students, because it's like you're getting a little touch of this, a little touch of that, a little touch of this. I don't know if it's changed now, but I found that extremely frustrating, to the point where when I was at the college, I think there were 5 or 6 of us were use of force instructors. Some people had martial arts background, and some didn't have any background in martial arts at all. Remember, one guy was a traffic cop, another guy was a detective, and he's taking the 2 or 3 week course on teaching self-defense, and suddenly he's the use of force expert, teaching all the recruits. Because again, back at that time, I had multiple years of martial arts background. I would have students come to me and ask if I would work with them after lunch, and I did. So a couple of guys would show up, and we'd go through our stuff, punch, kick, controlling. Well, that grew almost into a full class. I even had some of the instructors that weren't that proficient and realized they weren't that proficient were also coming into the class. And then it got shut down. And it got shut down because sometimes I can be, how do I put it?
Be careful.
Pardon? Direct.
Be careful.
Sometimes it can be direct. So here's an example. When I went to the college, and I had great guys. I mean, Paul Bonner, fabulous guy. He's the one that actually first introduced me to Muay Thai. But there was a guy there that I referred to as a 1 week expert. He'd fly down to California. He'd take a 1 week course on grappling. He'd fly over here, go there. He'd take a 1 week course on kickboxing. And I'm a true believer in let's try it as close to reality as we can without hurting each other, to find out if this stuff truly works before we start to teach it to people. And so he had a concept of grappling. And he said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to teach them to grapple. And I remember thinking to myself, God, that's pretty complicated stuff. So I spoke up and I said, I don't know. I mean, we've got these kids for such a short period of time. I don't think grappling is a good idea. Well, this is what we're going to teach, blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, why don't we try it? Why don't we try and see if we can do this? So one of the other guys who had martial arts background, and he kind of cued in, he goes, yeah, okay, I'll volunteer. I'll get on the ground with him. So he gets on the ground with this guy, and we say, go. Well, there's nothing the guy could do. The 1 week expert, he couldn't do anything, right? So they stand up, and we go, okay, well, let's try the second time. Try from another position. We try from another position. He's going to do his techniques that he learned. And we say, go. And there was nothing he could do again. So we ended up not teaching the grappling because as I said to him, if you're the expert and you can't do it, how can we expect these kids to do it? Mm-hmm. And then we had another situation was with regards to handgun retention, right? Someone goes to reach a gun. What do you do? And the idea was, well, okay, well, if the guy reaches and he grabs you with his right hand, you do this. But if he grabs you with his left hand, you do this. But if he grabs you this way, you do this. So there are 3 or 4 different techniques. And it's like, are you kidding me? You ever had your gun grabbed? The last thing you are trying to think in your entire mind is, you grab it left, right, front, back, this. I said, I don't agree. So we got into a little bit of words, and I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, while we're going through our sessions here, I'm going to lunge for your gun. He had a plastic gun in his holster. I'm going to lunge for your gun, and you do whatever technique you need to do. He said, okay. So we did. So we're doing this, we're doing that. About 20 minutes goes by, and we're all standing up, and one of the instructors is talking to us, and I'm standing behind this guy. Well, I grab that gun, and I drag him around and throw him around like a rag doll, and there was nothing he could do. And I finally let go, and I said, why didn't you do any of your techniques? He said, I was too busy trying to keep my balance. I said, absolutely. So I said, there's no specific technique to do. Just whatever the hell you can, because the first thing you got to do is try and maintain your balance. And then if you're close enough to headbutt them. If you're close enough to punch them. But to give them a specific thing to do under such duress, it's never going to work. So again, I proved my point.
Well, it's funny because part of the reason I wanted to ask this question is the idea that it's ironic that you go to clubs and they'll let you be there because you're like, do you want to learn what the police learn? But the police are actually doing a very small sliver of what a martial artist knows. Would that be fair to say, without any disrespect to the cops?
Absolutely. And that's why I ran the clubs.
Right.
So the guys that really wanted to learn something, they would come to me and I would teach them.
Yeah.
But that was frustrating because I think of a department of 800 police officers. You know my largest class that I had out of 800 officers? 25. And I know shift work plays a factor. I know that raising children, plays a factor. I know that we have to go to school to educate ourselves in order for promotions. So they're also going to night school is a factor, right? But I don't know, like of all the occupations, if you ever needed self-defense, my God, it was policing. You're dealing with the most violent people in society.
Sensei Suino, am I making it up? Was one of your friends who was maybe from Michigan State said the requirement was 4 hours a year? It was something absurdly low, correct?
Yeah.
I think you're muted just because of how much you cough and wheeze.
I do because I'm old and I smoke so many cigarettes. Yeah, it was
You're just hacking.
Hacking.
Points below the frame.
It was something like that. It was absurd. That was a cop friend of mine, and at one time many years ago, a martial arts club I was in, we went to the Michigan Department of Corrections and we tried to build a training program for their Department of Corrections guys, and when we pitched it to them, they laughed us out of the room. They go, You're suggesting something like 150 hours of training a year. You go, that's the stupidest thing we ever heard. We do 1 week of training, and like a third of it is tactics training. The rest of it is all classroom.
Yep.
They wouldn't hear of it, and we're like, well, that was a tenth of what we think you really need.
Yep.
So it's probably an epidemic, right?
Yep. You're right. I mean, it's the same here. It's either now a 8 or a 12-hour day, and out of that day, they have to put so many various different courses in there. Everything from firearms to sensitivity training to court procedures, so on and so forth. So realistically, the kick and punch factor that they're controlling, and you're still probably only looking at maybe 3 or 4 hours, like you said, a year, and that's it. Even firearms is only 3 to 4 hours a year. So when you hear these stories about, why don't you shoot the gun out of his hand? Are you kidding me? They're lucky if they can hit the freaking center mass. Never mind shoot a gun out of somebody's hand.
Do you have any like specific instances where you were like, I got to do this, and it just went down very cleanly in accordance with like martial arts or what someone would picture in a movie? Or is it the opposite where you're like, no, it's never gone down that cleanly?
I have one. It's so I was working plain clothes at the time, my partner and I. And we had made an arrest. We were in. He was doing paperwork, and I was kind of, rolling my fingers because I had finished my aspect of it. So I says, I'm just going to jump in the car and drive around by myself. So as I'm driving around by myself, a call comes out over by our Coliseum arena that a guy's breaking into cars. So I get around there, and I see this guy, fair-sized guy, and I get out of the car. I walk up to him. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, good. He was pissed. Drunk. And so I go, what are you doing? And he said, none of your business. So I show him the tin, my badge, and I go, I'm police. I says, I want to know what you're doing around here. We knew he was breaking into cars. So he has a few choice words for me. So I decide, I'm going to arrest you for drunk. You're under arrest for drunk. So I grab a hold of him. Well, the tussle's on. Well, I reap him. Are you familiar with what an outer reaping throw is? Yes, an outer reaping throw. So I reap him. Well, down he goes, and I hear this sickly crack on the pavement, right? And I'm looking down at him, and he's out cold, and all of a sudden this big pool of blood comes out from behind his head. And I'm looking at him going, oh shit. Well, as I'm looking at him, I get this slap on my shoulder. I turn around, and here's my duty inspector. So he's a senior commander, and he was a martial artist, and he used to come and used to watch my classes all the time. He was a black belt in Tae Kwon Do. So he looks over my shoulder at him, he goes, Thought about calling an ambulance yet? I go, no, sir. He goes, might be a good idea. Then he gets in his car and he disappears. I called an ambulance. Turns out it wasn't anything big, but I mean, it looked awful. And when he hit the ground, it was like it was a sickening sound. But yeah, he just a mild concussion and just kind of split his head a little bit. So the technique worked perfectly.
Just one, Sensei Suino, you get hands-on with a criminal. What's your go-to throw? What's the throw? Not the one you're best at, the one that's going to best deal with it.
If he's pushing or pulling, makes all the difference. If he's pulling, I'm doing that outer reap, that osotogari. If he's pushing, I'm doing a harai goshi, which is an inside-out version of the same thing, but it just goes forward instead of back. But it's just because those are kind of my two best, most high percentage throws. Yeah.
Yeah. Sensei Csoke, before we go to your 10 questions, which we ask all our guests, but can you tell us about a situation where it wasn't so clean and where it was actually your peace of mind? Because like the one thing we talk about a lot in this show is there's no technique, there's knowing how to fight. And that's going to be what gets you out when someone comes in a way that you've never seen before. Can you tell us about a moment where you were like, yeah, that didn't work, or the friend did show up and it was only the mental state that got me out of there, combined with whatever you had to do?
Yeah, we had a situation where we had an issue in a bar. Funny that bars and alcohol, things never go well. So it was a woman. She was at the bar and she's been extremely obnoxious. She was pretty pissed. And my partner went up to talk to her, and he's trying to reason with her. We always try to reason with people, try and get them to cooperate with us. And she was not having none of it, just having none of it. So he finally grabs her and he starts to try and drag her out of the bar. Well, unbeknownst to us, her boyfriend, who was a gang member, happened to just come out of the washroom. So I see him because he's making a beeline straight to my partner. So I grab a hold of him and we got the tussle going on. This push-pull thing like this, work our way outside. It was wintertime, so we all had coats on. And I remember getting him into, and I'm not going to call it a choke because it's not a choke. It's really a sleeper. It used to be my go-to in my early days before it was banned. So I get him into a sleeper and I'm trying to put him out and I'm squeezing and nothing's happening. And I'm squeezing, and with the adrenaline rush, I am absolutely exhausted. I have no strength or energy left in my arm. All I can do is basically hang on to this guy. Unfortunately, a couple of more cruisers show up and we get this guy to the ground, get him a pair of handcuffs, get him in the car. So I drive him to the station, take him into the interview room, and he takes his coat off, and he must have had the biggest arms I'd ever seen on a human being. So then I remember thinking to myself, thank God, no wonder I had such a hard time with this guy, because he was a handful. But the sleeper was always my go-to, and for some reason I just couldn't get it on this guy.
Nothing works 100% of the time, eh?
That's right.
Hey, Robert, want to do our 10 questions?
You caught me off guard. I'm not sure I have them prepared.
I'm going to send them to you. Sensei Csoke, we asked 10 questions of all our guests. We ask that you answer as impulsively as you can, but then take time if you need to elaborate. And Robert, you're such a fundamental part of this show. Did that just come through for you on your text? If not, I'll make sure that I start asking these, but you should have that now.
All right,
handwriting, let me know. So Sensei Csoke, answer as impulsively as you can, but feel free to elaborate on your answer. And you have 10 minutes for 10 questions, and that's why Sensei Suino's holding that phone that way.
All right, let's start it off. Sensei Csoke, what is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
I'm going to say the carotid artery strike. Get him with that, and I'd like to see the guy stand up.
Awesome. Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Well, because I've studied so many different arts, I don't have a particular, I have more than one. So I have to say Masaru Shintani. The reason for him was such a gentleman, personified what I truly believed a martial artist should be. Extremely skilled man, very patient man. The other one was, as brief as it was Rick Joslin. He truly opened my eyes when I walked in that club and I got bounced around and I put on a pair of gloves for the first time. It truly left a major impression on me for the rest of my career, where I chose to take my direction. And then the third would be Gordie Gong, my Muay Thai instructor. Gordie at one time, I believe, was the World Karate Association lightweight kickboxing champ, either in the 80s or the 90s. Again, Gordie personified highly, highly skilled individual with the patience of Job, that whole concept of calmness within himself, but a dynamite man.
All right, number three. Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
Well, I think if you put a classroom of people in a room and you brought three people in that had three T-shirts on, and if one person had the father of judo, if one person had the father of karate on their shirt, and one person had Bruce Lee on their shirt, what do you think the majority of the people are going to point at and are going to know? I'm going to say Bruce Lee. Unless you're in judo, then you know it's Kano. Unless you know your karate, it's Fatakuchi, right? But Bruce Lee, and I know, I've listened to some of these podcasts, and the majority of people feel the same way. He had such an impression on us, especially back in the day, like I said, when the martial arts wasn't that well known. It was him that really introduced it to all of us, by watching Enter the Dragon and all that. Like it really made you want to take the martial arts.
Sensei Copeland, did you want to jump in?
No, go right ahead.
Oh, I just see your hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your martial arts training?
Who's going to teach me next? Well, it's funny on that note because I just went back to Joslin's after 50 years. I just went back to Joslin's again for Muay Thai and kickboxing, but I'm also going to take I'm looking at going into an Aikido club for something completely different.
Fun to be a white belt. If
Yep.
heaven exists, what would you like God to say to you when you get there?
Thank you for your service, because I saw what you put up with.
Do you have a favorite film or TV martial artist, whether or not they're a real martial artist in real life?
No, a movie? Say that again.
Do you have a favorite film or TV martial artist, whether or not they are a real martial artist?
In all honesty, I don't. You know what? I never watched a lot of martial arts movies, only because I found them just a little on the hokey side. So no, I really don't.
Do you have a martial artist, living or dead, of all time that you wish you could have trained with?
I'm drawing a blank on his name. Small Circle Jiu-Jitsu. What the hell's his name? Help me out there, guys.
Wally J.
Wally J. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good answer.
So obviously.
Almost at the end here, if everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit that you've gotten from martial arts, regardless of whether or not they train, what benefit would they get?
And this came up earlier. I'm going to say confidence, because it truly gave me the courage to stand up to the individuals that I stood up to. Because like I said, I met some very, very nasty people. And it was my martial arts background that really gave me the courage to be able to stand up to them.
I like that answer. And then the last two come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement and what is your greatest regret?
Again, martial arts wise, I'm going to say my greatest achievement was being recognized for my skill set on an international level. My greatest regret was not having the wherewithal to really go full out, full contact Muay Thai or kickboxing. It's one thing in the club to get hit the odd time, right? Nobody goes into the club to give each other a black eye, but let's face it, it's a contact sport. Yeah, you're going to get hurt. You're going to take a side kick into the ribs, so on and so forth. But I have to admit, I didn't have the wherewithal to constantly take full contact pounding to the face, full contact pounding to the body. And I have to admit that I didn't.
How'd you do, Sensei Suino? How's our time?
It is 5 minutes and 35 seconds. So
Oh,
nice.
very nice.
Good.
4.5 minutes
concise
back.
questions.
No
And
charge.
Sensei Suino, how did Robert do if you had to evaluate?
I think Robert did pretty well. Putting him on the spot like that was a ton
Yep.
of fun.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was pretty good. We'll
I'm
let him
kind
do
of
it
blown away
again.
how well you can read my handwriting because I just have a photo of me having written the questions. Sensei Copeland, I know that you had a couple ideas you wanted to crack open from before the 10 questions.
Yeah, I was really intrigued with the threat cues that Sensei Csoke was talking about. Those are, I mean, golden nuggets because even the assailant should know those ideas, and when they start doing those things, how things could escalate. I mean, education is always on both sides, right? So officers know the threat cues, but if somebody knows that if I do this, this could happen, it might kind of encourage them not to do silly things because it's only going to escalate. And then you have to comply. So threat cues, I think, is a great tool that could educate, right across the board because it's something that everybody should be aware of.
Absolutely.
Well, let's break that open a little bit because I think what you're saying, for police officers is so important, especially in terms of this means this, both legally, I think that's important, but also just so you're safe. No one should have to get hit in the face. But where does that overlap with the average martial artist or even just the average man or woman or person out at a bar, Sensei Csoke? Like, where can someone learn this stuff or where can you break it down for us so clearly that anyone listening right now will be like, that feels intuitively correct. I can't believe I haven't thought of it.
It's a little different from a civilian point of view, I have to admit. I'm trying to think of a scenario. I guess probably the most common scenario I could think of for civilians is one wanting to fight another one in a bar. And being able, I mean, some of the threat cues are pretty obvious, some of the little more ones are subtle. So I have a funny one for you. So we used to teach this whole threat cue concept, and I talked about the removal of clothing, right? So my partner and I had gone to a disturbance, and this guy, we're trying to reason with him, and he looked at us, and he took his false teeth out on the table. Well, my partner and I absolutely broke out laughing. We could have easily dealt with this individual in the first place, but it was a teaching moment. It was a use of force teaching moment for police officers when he took those teeth out. Getting back to your question, it's being able to justify the force that you use as an individual, right? Yeah, so it's about being articulate. So if one individual wants to fight another individual and he takes that fighting stance, and suddenly you throw a thrust kick and take him out in the stomach and drop him, and all of a sudden the police show up and you go, we got a fight going on here. What's going on? Well, first off, if you have two individuals that are willing to fight, nobody's breaking the law. It's an agreement. That's legally allowed. But if you can articulate, the reason I struck this individual was he took a fighting stance. A lot of times they'll say, well, how do you know it was a fighting stance? Well, in our case, like on court, they would say, officer, how do you know it was a fighting stance? Well, because we train in use of force and I have a martial arts background. That's the exact same stance that I take when I'm going to fight. Makes sense, right? So being able to pick up those threat cues, like I said, someone removes their seat. Someone goes to take their hat off. Someone goes to pull their shirt off. You have the right, realistically, to take them out right there and then. They've demonstrated to you exactly what they're planning to do. So why do you have to wait to get hit by that individual? But you have to know how to articulate it, right? Particularly in court, you have to know how to articulate it.
Yes.
So Sensei Copeland, let me throw this to you.
Yeah.
What's your line in the sand, right? Like, let's discuss. We're not cops. What's your line in the sand?
Seriously, it's important to understand the situation, but if you feel threatened, your life is in danger, you have every right to defend yourself based on these threat cues without getting hit first. And in in all honesty, if he's removing his false teeth or pulling off his shirt, that's the perfect opportunity to, put this thing to an end. Why wait? You always want the advantage, and while he's got his shirt over his head, that's an advantage.
You're right.
Absolutely.
And when you said the word, when you feel threatened, and before we learned the words articulation, we said the same thing. Officer, why did you do this? Well, I had a hunch. What we didn't know was we were recognizing threat cues, but we didn't know how to articulate it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like where you said you feel threatened. Well, again, it's almost the same as having a hunch, but you're recognizing things.
Yeah.
It's learning to articulate and talk about what you recognized and why you deemed it to be a threat.
Yeah.
What about you, Sensei Suino? You got a line in the sand, or is it is it situation to situation? Has it changed since 1968?
Well, I hope that I never have to face that. Maybe the way I encapsulate now is all the rare argument I have with a client at work. There's a little bit of a same kind of dance, right? Not the physical dance, but the verbal dance. When I teach self-defense and use of force in Michigan, we talk about the idea of an honest and reasonable belief that your risk, that you're facing an imminent risk of great bodily harm or death or sexual assault. Like that's the Michigan standard, right? But it has to be an articulable, even for the civilian, right? If I'm going to use force against somebody, especially deadly force, I need to be articulate the risk. And then the jury or the judge will decide whether it was an honest and reasonable belief in the eyes of the law. So real similar, right? Kind of evaluation. Sensei Csoke, I wanted to ask you something, as you were talking earlier about the idea of, finding yourself as a cop, finding yourself in the presence of groups of people that maybe have bad intent, mild bad intent, or sometimes not so mild. What is that? I don't know how to ask this question. How does that change you, right? You're a guy that's never been a cop. You go around in groups, you see drunk people at bars, they're being stupid. Maybe you have a beer and you're friends with them. 20 years later, you've seen a bunch of these groups. How does it change your perception of social groups, how you carry yourself, who you make friends with? Like a lifetime as a cop has got to end up giving you a very different perspective on the world.
It really does. Sometimes it's not such a good perspective. Sometimes you become jaded. What you see. So an example, I'm never comfortable going into a bar ever, even though I've been retired 15 years, never comfortable. Because why? Every time I walked into a bar as an officer, there was an issue and I had to resolve the issue. Never comfortable going to big events where there's alcohol, whether it's, a city park, stuff like that. Because again, whenever we were there to keep the peace, and there was always drunken, stupid idiots. And a lot of times we would say, even if my wife and I would go out for dinner, it'd be like, okay, it's 10:30, we need to get out of here. Because we know at certain times the witching hour starts. You know what? If you eliminated alcohol in this world, you wouldn't need 90% of the police officers. Everything is so alcohol related.
Wow.
So anything to do with alcohol, I'm not overly comfortable because it was nothing but dealing with confrontations all the time.
Do you pick your friends differently now?
My friends are the same people that I had as young kids and teenagers. Newer people. I mean, you can briefly learn very quickly about like-minded people. I mean, you don't know me. I don't know you. But I know that I could sit down and have easy confrontations. No, conversations.
Fair enough.
I mean, that too.
Yeah, well,
friends after. That's the point.
Sign the waiver.
Yeah, I could have conversations. I could have a beer with any one of you because we're very like-minded people, and you learn to read people very quickly, right? And I don't even know if it's so much the ability as a police officer is just being a human being. When you travel to different places in the world, you know where you belong and where you don't belong. You know what restaurants you belong in. You know what bars you belong in. It's not hard to look around and get a pretty good idea, right, from the environment that you're in and the way people are acting around you. So it's not difficult as I get older, and I think most of us get older, to be able to pick the right people in your life.
That sounds about right. And I like what you said also, we don't have to agree to be like-minded. Like there's so many people I'm like-minded with where we will arrive at different opinions, but we have a thought process or a way of processing thoughts that we respect in one another. And I think some of that gets lost in this day and age.
And you hit the nail, respecting one another, and that's what it's all about. Let's face it, we all have friends who have different political views. We all have friends, have different thoughts on certain issues. We may not necessarily agree on them, but but we respect each other's opinions, yeah.
Thank you, Sensei. Time is real, and as such, we need to thank our crew. Robert Shlomsky, who's with us tonight, Justin Shea, Andrei Sedashev, Josh Kitchens, Christiana Landolt, Drita Giuliani, Stavros Stavroulias, Emily Ruth Driscoll, who worked the behind the scenes for us. Thank you so much. So, Sensei Csoke, what we do is we go around the horn, we say a little bit about our time with you, and then we let you have the last word to say goodnight to everybody watching. So, Sensei Copeland, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. Give us some thoughts about our time tonight with Sensei Csoke and anything else you might want to say.
Well, this was actually very eye-opening in a variety of ways. Sensei Csoke is very talented. He's confident, very articulate, and the different aspect of his career and martial arts was very revealing, and I really truly enjoyed that. And he didn't talk much about his being denied his application in Hamilton, but he's quite the established artist, and he does some really good stuff that it wasn't part of his chat tonight, but he's got talents. He's got all kinds of talents, and it was really great listening to him, and I appreciate the chance to get to meet him over the Zoom, and hopefully I'll meet him in person. That was great.
Thank you.
Sensei Copeland. Sensei Suino, what do you want to say about our time tonight?
Man, loved it. Thank you so much. I'm so glad this came together. I'm not Randy, and I take some notes, but not as many as he did. But I'll share you some highlights. Of course, I absolutely love the fact that you were involved in gymnastics.
Yeah.
I think it really influenced my path as a martial artist and how I like to move. So cool to see that was something for you. Absolutely hilarious that you said, "Hey, I'm already when you got your green belt. I'm already in the dark colors, so I might as well stay with it."
That was good.
Yeah. Love the story at Rick Joslin's, right? Went in the ring, kicked the guy in the stomach. He goes, "Yeah, nice kick." I had never heard the PR 24 explained before. Public relations 24 inches. That's golden.
We kind of kept that to ourselves.
Yeah. As Copeland Sensei said, you articulated the different levels of use of force. That was really cool. It was really cool to think about that and to kind of open up that. I've got to explore that a little bit more. It was a really fascinating idea, and I'm going to pay more attention to watching people in the dojo and outside the dojo, just based on that framework that you provided. Thanks so much for coming on. I know we'll cross paths again at one of these other events or in a training seminar. Really grateful that you came on and did the show with us.
Thank you.
Sensei, I'm going to throw it to Robert in a sec, but I get to talk so much during the show. The one thing for me, and Sensei Suino just touched on it, so many martial artists would have that experience you had at Sensei Joslin's and ignore it or justify it and be like, well, if I could have done the dim mak or if I could have done this, it wouldn't have gone that way. But the humility that then led to what I believe is your path for the rest of everything you've described, which is a humility. Does it work? Doesn't it? And I can't pretend it does if it doesn't. And, I'm not going to waste time on it. And if I know it does, it's just, I think too few martial artists, I think more and more, but there's still YouTube and keyboard warriors. I think too few people are willing to listen to the truth of their experiences in spite of what they might want the truth to be. And I love that you did that. And I love that it made you a teacher and that it altered your path. I think that's so powerful. Robert, what do you want to say before we throw it to Sensei Csoke?
Yeah, Sensei, thanks for being a guest tonight. A few of the comments that I wrote down, things you said that I enjoyed was in the beginning, you said you enjoyed the hardness of it when you started karate. I like that. The badge of honor to come home with bruises and your battle scars from a tough class. I can definitely identify with that. The personal competition with yourself. And I thought that Hamilton Police didn't want to hire artists. I had a good chuckle over that. Yeah, I think I really appreciate your experience that you bring to the show and some of the points you talked about, threat cues and levels of escalation and things like that. You definitely have a very calm and confident demeanor, which I associate with a lot of good martial artists. So I appreciate seeing that. The threat cues is one I'm going to bring to my own classes and think about a bit, and almost think about it in reverse as a martial artist. What cues do you not want to give to people to escalate in that sense? Because I often tell people, if you're in a confrontation, you don't stand there and close your fists. You keep your hands open, bring them up, but you're kind of ready to strike. But as soon as you close your fists, you kind of give away that you're ready to fight. And I'll have to give some thought to the other threat cues, but kind of reverse engineer them as a martial artist. So I know you've given me a lot to think about, and thank you again for making an appearance tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Nice to hear you. Sensei Csoke, how do you want to say goodnight and send everyone off for another week?
Well, this is quite an experience, I have to admit. And I think this will, so when I was in Libya, nobody had any idea who I was. Who's this happy guy walking around? How can the guy be at such a high level and we have no idea who this man is? But I mean, again, I had delved myself into the police world and that whole use of force factor. So I will be at Capital Conquest this year teaching. So now I look forward to seeing Sensei Copeland, some of the others, Nick, and I'm sure some of the people that have been listening that maybe now they know exactly who I am.
Well, we look forward to seeing you. Thank you, and thank you, senseis. Thank you, special guest Sensei Copeland, and not really a special guest, but yes, Robert, we really appreciate it. Good night, everybody.